So our next speaker is Professor John Wyatt, who's the Emeritus Professor of Neonatal Pediatrics, Ethics and Perinatology at University College London. He's also a senior researcher at the Faraday Institute here, where he's co-leading a research project looking at the social and human implications of AI and robotics technology, which is what he's going to talk about today. But he's also an expert, often called on to consult on things or speak about bioethics and medical ethics, and has written a number of good books on that. So we're looking forward to what you've got to say.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I apologise for my voice. I'm recovering from a chest infection and feeling distinctly croaky. I don't think I'm infectious anymore, but forgive me if I'm struggling a bit with my voice. So we're going to be looking at this very interesting, rapidly developing, challenging field of AI and robotics, and what the implications are for being human, and particularly how can we respond from a Christian perspective. My background is as a baby doctor, working in a big intensive care unit in central London, and it was really because of involvement with the cutting-edge technology in terms of keeping babies alive that I became more and more interested in some of the big ethical debates going on, and so that's how my interest in bioethics developed. And it's really because of that, and the question which comes up time and time again in bioethics is, what does it mean to be human? And particularly, what does it mean to be human as technology advances? How does this change our understanding of what it means to be human? And that's really why, as the logical progression is I see advances in AI and robotics as the next big challenge which is coming, which is going to ask this question, what does it mean to be human, in very new and surprising and challenging ways. And I think it's going to affect all of us in different ways, and we need to start thinking about it. I don't have any slick or easy answers, and but at least I can raise some of the questions, I think, which technology is going to raise, and perhaps challenge us as to how we as a Christian community can respond to some of these big questions. So historically, these three kinds of beings, the animal, the human and the machine, were seen as entirely separate. Human beings were unique on the planet, made in God's image. Animals were our close relatives. And then there were the things we made, the artifacts, which are different from us and separate and so on. And what seems to be happening is the boundaries between these concepts are increasingly being blurred. So what's the difference between the animal and the human? Are we just primates with a bit of extracerebral cortex? And what's the difference between a human brain and a machine, an intelligent machine? Are we machines made out of meat, as one roboticist put it, as opposed to machines made out of silicon? So I don't need to tell you that technology, and in particular information technology, is absolutely pervading our lives and advancing at an extraordinary rate. It's only 10 years since Steve Jobs announced the first iPhone. And you just think, what has happened in 10 years, and the way that smartphones have completely changed so many people's experience of living. There are now billions of them on the planet. All that has happened in 10 years. Just imagine what might happen in the next 10 years in terms, again, of the life-changing effects of technology. And part of the problem with technology is that it's so ubiquitous, it so surrounds us that it becomes invisible to us. And I like this proverb: if you want to understand what water is, don't ask a fish. That's part of our problem. We are so surrounded by technology that we find it actually difficult to understand. And I think technology is a much more profound and challenging thing than we think. Often Christians have a very superficial, sometimes called an instrumentalist understanding of technology. Well, it's just like a tool. You can use it for good, you can use it for evil. What's the problem? No, it's much more complex and subtle than that. The philosopher George Grant, Catholic philosopher in Canada, wrote very penetratingly about technology, and he said technology could be defined as the interpenetration of making and knowing. It's actually in the very name itself, techne and logos, making and knowing. And technology is orientated towards the mastery of nature, both non-human nature, the natural world, but also increasingly human nature itself. I think that's a theme that we shall come back to. If you haven't heard of Moore's law, you ought to. Moore is still alive. He's an engineer who worked for Intel, one of the big chip companies. And he noticed back in the 70s that the number of transistors that you were able to put onto a chip, a computer chip, was approximately doubling every 18 months. And he just wrote this up as a phenomenon. But extraordinarily, ever since the 1970s, that has continued. So in other words, every 2 years, computer power is doubling. And because that's of this doubling phenomenon, if you see this graph, it starts with 1,000 transistors and it ends with 10 billion, just in the space between 1970 and 2015. And Moore's law, this phenomenon of increasing computer power is the reason why computers are becoming progressively, every year or two, more sophisticated, more powerful, more able to do things which previously were completely impossible. People are looking into the future and trying to predict how long this is going to go on for, and there are different discussions about it, but there seems little doubt that computer power and all the associated technology with it is going to carry on increasing, at least for the next 10 or 20 years, and therefore things which were completely impossible and completely beyond imagination are increasingly going to become feasible and even routine. If you want to look to the future, then see where the smart money is going, and there's no doubt that money is pouring into AI and so-called cognitive systems, systems that are designed to reproduce human thinking. And this is billions of dollars of investment of smart money is going into this area, and is likely to have implications across so many aspects of human society. Just over the last year, there's been increasing awareness of the implications that this might have for employment. And I think this is going to be a big issue for the future. I like this quote that says, "The workers of the future will be divided into two categories: those who are good at working with intelligent machines and those who are replaced by intelligent machines." You've only got two choices. You either get good at working with the machines or they will replace you. And that these kind of jobs doesn't apply to labouring, manual kind of jobs, but increasingly it applies to highly professional jobs, jobs involving cognitive function across the professions. In fact, if you try to think of a professional job which is relatively immune from replacement by intelligent systems, it's quite hard to think of them. I think possibly church leader might be one of the few. But even there, don't bet your money on it. I think it's only a matter of time before I suspect the Christian right are going to start developing evangelistic robots. I think it's going to happen, and they're going to be giving us all kinds of apologetics and sermons and quotes and bon mots and all the rest. So they won't need sandwiches for lunch. They never get bored. They carry on. They're constantly learning. I mean, what's not to like? So various reports have tried to look forward and predict what the likely implications for employment might be. This is a report from the Oxford Martin Institute predicting what percentage of jobs, 35% of jobs in the UK, at risk of being replaced by automation. But notice that in developing countries, the percentage of jobs potentially that could be replaced by automation is much higher, as high as 85% in Ethiopia. So one of the tragic possibilities of all this is that the gap between rich and poor, north and south, may actually become accentuated by fast improvements in automation. So for instance, as we all know, there's been a massive outsourcing of jobs from the rich West to countries like China and Southeast Asia and so on. But once these jobs become automated, why would you continue to have them in places like India and China? It makes much more sense to put the automation back in the rich West, leading to devastating unemployment issues in poorer countries. So I think there's little doubt, not just in poor countries, but elsewhere, there is going to be huge disruption. One of the slogans of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs is move fast and break things. That's what they're trying to do. And the theory is as you break things, as you cause disruption, as you as you disrupt employment patterns and social patterns and so on, that good things will happen, won't it? By creating chaos and disruption. Isn't it obvious that good things will develop and will come? Well, so I think one of the issues for the local churches and for the Christian community as a whole is what are the pastoral implications going to be as people find themselves being replaced, their employment, their prospects, and the prospects of getting a job in the future seem diminishing. How will we as communities respond to these kind of challenges and threats? IBM have been developing a system called Watson, which is designed to learn by copying the techniques of professionals in different fields and then scaling up their cognitive abilities. They call this cognitive computing. One of the areas where Watson is being touted is in the area of healthcare. And IBM claim that you can take a system, train it with very experienced medical professionals, in this case with cancer specialists in a hospital in New York, and then you can take that same system and give it to a junior newly qualified doctor and show that that newly qualified doctor is able to operate at the same level of diagnostic skill and accuracy as a very senior specialist. So on the positive side, you can see that these kind of systems are probably going to lead to a democratization of knowledge. The sort of highly specialist knowledge and expertise which previously only a very small number of people had is going to become widely available in all kinds of forms and widely available around the world. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. IBM have invested billions of dollars into their system, and of course they will want to make sure that they get a commercial return. And so you can see that power is focusing on a small number of high-tech companies. It's not just IBM. Google have been developing a system. They recently developed a system to play the Chinese game Go. And apparently when they first explained this, the engineers were really appalled, because the reason that Go was chosen is because it's the number of possible moves are so enormous that no basic number crunching would be capable of solving the problem. The extraordinary thing about this system is that basically they downloaded thousands of games of Go from the internet and taught the machine the basic rules, the program, but they then left two versions of the computer program playing against itself, and the two versions of the program ran millions and millions of games and improving their strategies against each other. And then eventually they brought this computer program out and they got it to play one of the world-leading Go players, and lo and behold, it won. The computer won hands down. And what was interesting is that one of the people who were watching the Go, who was a Go expert, said, you know, some of those moves were just so beautiful. There was no human player would have made that move, but once you saw how it worked, it was such a beautiful kind of move. Now, the important thing to point out is that the people who programmed this system were not experts in Go themselves. So you often hear people say, well, a computer can only do what it was programmed to do. I'm afraid that just isn't true. These computers are capable of learning things which no human brains have learned before, and that is both the power of the systems but also the potential why so many people feel uneasy about where this might go and about the potential implications. They're using the same system, the same company, DeepMind, is pairing with the NHS using machine learning systems for medical imaging. This is a big developing field now, and it turns out that systems are often able to pick up minute abnormalities which human observers, radiologists and so on, are not able to find. So there's no doubt that this kind of technology is going to come sweeping through healthcare and will have all kinds of implications for good or ill. Care of the elderly is another area which is frequently being touted. The problem is there are far too many elderly people. There just are not enough carers. As we project towards the future, there are going to be more and more people dependent. So the machines have to create the solution. I don't know about you, if you were feeling confused and not very well, and then this thing turned up to give you your morning coffee, whether that would make you feel any better or even more confused. is another question. But there's no doubt, again, that this kind of technology is going to be developed as companions and friends and so on for elderly people, for people with mental health issues, for people who are young, the vulnerable, and so on. Bizarrely, there is a software company where you can feed this software with all the text you've ever produced, all the emails, everything you've ever produced in your life. And then after you've died, this program will continue to release texts. It will, you will be able to discuss with it and talk, and it will, your personality will continue to interact as a form of eternal life for the digital age. Autonomous weapons, again, all major industrial companies are now investing heavily in using artificial intelligence and robotics for weapon systems. And again, it doesn't take a genius to think what the possible implications of all that might be. China is one of the areas which is leading work in this area, investing massively in artificial intelligence and so on. Well, one of the interesting and scary things is that there doesn't appear to be any physical limit to the potential processing power of intelligent machines. So when we're thinking about physical systems which are affected by biology or engineering, physics and so on, then there are always some kind of physical limits as to how powerful an engine can be. But when you're dealing with ones and noughts, there doesn't seem to be any physical limit as to potentially how powerful these kind of processing machines could get. And that's led to some interesting speculation. So this is taken from a book called Superintelligence by an Oxford professor, Nick Bostrom. So on the axis here is intelligence. And this is the intelligence of a mouse. This is the intelligence of a chimpanzee. This is the intelligence of a village idiot. And this is the intelligence of Einstein. So that range is the full range of human intelligence. What happens when a machine turns up that's somewhere out here? Do we think that this machine with intelligence out here is going to be particularly interested in human beings and in their interests any more than we are particularly interested in mice? And how do we know, therefore, it's going to be friendly? Is it likely that an evil superintelligence might be created? The sort of science fiction Terminator tropes and so on are very frequent in Hollywood, but interestingly there are serious philosophers and technologists who are starting to get worried about this. And in fact, they've added superintelligence to one of the existential threats, so-called, for the human race. So things like asteroid impacts and pandemics and other devastating climate change and so on, and superintelligence has been added to the potential existential threats for the human race. And there are certainly some people, Stephen Hawking's one of them, Elon Musk is others, quite serious thinkers who are warning about the possibility that some kind of evil intelligence might be created unintentionally. What's interesting is if you adopt a strictly physicalist understanding of the human brain, in other words, you believe that the human brain is nothing but wiring, nothing but connections between cells and so on, then you have to say that every wonderful human thing that ever came out of the human brain, cathedrals and Mozart and whatever you want, is just a product of wiring, but also, therefore, all the most horrific evil things that ever came out of the human brain, Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin and everything else, these are just products of wiring. And if it's happened once, if wiring produced those kind of evil geniuses, why do we think it might not happen again? And on a strictly logical basis, you can see the logic behind that. The other slightly scary thing is, do we think, one of the things we notice about evil human beings is they don't usually come along with a badge saying, by the way, I'm evil. And often the evil human beings are profoundly manipulative and dissembling and come across as an angel, as a wolf in sheep's clothing and so on. So should we imagine, therefore, that a super intelligent machine might do the same? It might come along as a completely friendly, innocent, and not to be in no sense are raising concerns, whereas actually it had some profound malevolence. Another interesting thing in the modern era is this idea that these machines are going to increasingly replace our biological brains as we go on into the future. So Martin Rees, distinguished astronomer who's spoken here at the Faraday Institute, abstract thinking by biological brains has underpinned the emergence of all culture and science, but this activity, spanning tens of millennia at most, will be a brief precursor to the more powerful intellects of the inorganic post-human era. So there's a new narrative which is developing. We're all familiar with the left-hand part of this narrative, that we've got this meaningless universe, and then somehow in the swamp of the chaos, something life emerges and it gradually advances until we reach humanity. But the new narrative is that this is not the end point of evolution. Evolution is going to go on, but it's not going to go on in a biological form. It's going to go on in a mechanical form. And some people are arguing that the machines that we make, these are our real children, our mind children. Our biological children, our meat children, are always going to be limited and share the limitations of our own human nature. But the machines we make are not affected by the same limitations. They're going to go on into the future. They're going to explore the universe. They're going to make colonies throughout the solar system, and they will go on and do all the things which humanity has never been able to do. So you can see there's a new kind of eschatology here, isn't there? A new way of seeing the future. It's a very materialistic eschatology. It's interesting to see these spiritual themes, as you can often see recurrence of spiritual themes coming out in Silicon Valley and in the way as technologists look towards the future. Along with this, many technological thinkers express a form of disgust at their own human embodiment. This is one of the things that I think is really striking if you read popular secular science so often. We are pathetic, ludicrous, laughable bipeds who are only fit for survival on the African savannah. Our bodies are a hodgepodge of partially functioning biological engineering, which is subject to frequent breakdown, inexorable decline. Our brains are dominated by reptilian reflexes from our biological ancestors, which frequently function in inappropriate ways, are maladapted to modern society. Our information processing capacity is limited and subject to frequent errors. Every time we access a memory, we distort and change the encoded file, leading to gross errors. Our perceptions of reality are highly distorted. Our brains create an imaginary reality for survival processes. That's who we are. By comparison, isn't it obvious that the machines do so much better? The machines don't have those kind of limitations. Compared with human intelligence, advancing machine intelligence seems desirable and better suited to the modern world. So I think you can see a two-way psychological movement. On the one hand, there is the movement from the machine to the human. We understand the working of the human brain by looking at machines. We understand ourselves as machines, as being machine-like. So that's this movement. There's the machine, and we put the machine thinking onto ourselves. And it's just interesting in popular discourse how these kind of things, we talk about people being hardwired or programmed. Max Tegmark, a physicist, says life is a self-replicating information processing system. Now that's what we are. We understand ourselves as machines. And that kind of language is very, very common. I think it's really important for us to push back and to recognize the difference between a useful metaphor and a fundamental description. Because there are many aspects of the human brain and the human beings which are machine-like, but it's both false and incoherent to say that the brain is a machine. Because it's clearly not. A machine is something created by a human being for a human person. That's the definition of a machine. So when you say that humans are machines, it's incoherent. And yet that kind of language is very, very common. And we need to point out that it's logically and philosophically incoherent. So there's the machine, the move from the machine to the human. Then there's the other move, and the anthropomorphism, to see a human form in a non-human being. So we take our humanity and we put it onto the machine. And this is a phenomenon which is increasingly strikes me as a very important but little recognized phenomenon. So this little thing is called a neo-robot. It's about 18 inches high. It moves around, it talks, its eyes blink. It's very cute. And as you can see, people like interacting with it. I was at a conference in Durham last year, and where we were with a whole group of senior church leaders, including bishops and others from various denominations. And as part of the conference, we visited a computer lab at Durham University. And then, as we walked into the lab, there were 5 of these little things on the floor. They were all switched on, their arms were moving, they were talking, their eyes were flashing. Instantly, the atmosphere amongst the group changes. A diocesan bishop, no less, gets down on his hands and knees and says, "Oh, the little darling, hello, how are you?" And people are smiling and waving and engaging. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, we're just having this conference thinking about how to engage with technology. And yet, if this is how senior church leaders respond, what hope is there for the rest of us? It also struck me, thinking about it, that most of the people there would be parents, and they would have cared for small toddlers. And one of the things that is, quotes, hardwired into our constitution is that when you see a toddler alone on a floor, walking around, instantly you engage with them. You don't just turn your back and go the other way. It's hardwired into our humanity. That's what you do. And the manufacturers know this, and they are therefore using our inbuilt tendency to anthropomorphism to develop relationships, quotes, with these machines. This is called Sophie. There's a lot of hype about her at the moment. She's in it is produced by a company called Hanson Robotics. And it's interesting, just going onto their website, they talk about uncanny realism. Our robots are endowed with remarkable expressiveness and interactivity, with the ability to simulate a full range of facial expressions so they can engage with people deeply and emotionally. Friendly and empathic. Our advanced AI software empowers our robots to understand speech, hold natural conversations, see and respond to facial expressions, realizing the dream of friendly machines that love and care about humans. So this is what the manufacturers are aiming at. They're aiming to make machines which give us the impression, which simulate empathy, friendship, companionship. And this is a quote from a journalist. "Human compassion can be gamed. It is the ultimate psychological hack, a glitch in human response that can be exploited in an attempt to make a sticky product. That's why designers give AIs human characteristics in the first place. They want us to like them." And what I learned at that conference in Durham is that anthropomorphism is not under conscious control. It's not something you sit and you say, "I will respond in this particular way." It happens at a much more unconscious, immediate level, and therefore much harder to control, much more open to manipulation. And this I think it's going to lead to all kinds of novel and challenging moral problems. So, for instance, if you take a robot and so you allow someone to create a sort of empathic relationship with them, and then you torture the robot, quotes, you do something to it which is immensely unpleasant, you can show, using brain scanning techniques, that exactly the same brain areas are activated as though you were torturing a human being in front of them. And that's going to lead to all kinds of interesting and difficult questions. Is it morally wrong to torture a robot? I mean, and there's an analogy here with animal welfare legislation. As a country, we have very, very strong laws about what you're allowed to do with a kitten. So much so that you could be criminally prosecuted and imprisoned for maltreating a kitten. Is that because, as a society, we believe that the interests of kittens are so important compared to, for instance, pigs or octopuses? Or is it because we sense that when somebody is torturing a kitten, they're actually saying something about their own humanity. They're in some sense damaging themselves, and we don't want to be part of a society that allows people to torture kittens. And if that's the case, then there might well need to be regulation about what we're allowed to do with human-like robots, and again, raising all kinds of difficult and interesting questions. Anthropomorphism is a universal human tendency which is largely outside of conscious control. It's part of our humanity and brings profound positive benefits, but at the same time it renders us open to manipulation and deception. And I think these simulated persons, we're going to be surrounded by simulated persons. I predict in the next 10 years our environments are increasingly going to be surrounded by simulated persons of different kinds. Some of them will look like this. They'll be little cute physical incarnate beings. Some of them will be on screens or avatars. This is a virtual therapist that on a screen that interacts with you and responds to your facial gestures and your speech in real time. There's going to be these digital avatars on the internet. You can even have an avatar which you download all your own emails to, and it becomes an alter ego. It will talk back to you. It will say to you and talk to you as though it will reproduce the kind of thoughts you have in your own head, and it'll tell you what you would normally do in this situation is you would do this, so you can have a sort of dialogue with this being. The simulated persons are going to be, some of them are just going to be voices like Alexa or Google Home. Again, enormous amount of commercial power to get these voices everywhere in our homes and so on. Not surprisingly, a lot of effort going into sex robots and using technology in this kind of way. It's already, there's discussion going on about what kind of regulation there should be for sex robots. For instance, should a paedophile be allowed to have a child-like robot? The arguments will be it reduces harm and so on. Who is being harmed? And you can see these extraordinarily complex moral questions that are coming. There's already a campaign against sex robots from a group of feminists who are arguing that this is demeaning of women. And I think you can see this kind of debate is going to run and run. At what point should an intelligent machine be considered a person? At some point there are going to be machines that claim to be conscious, that claim to be aware of their own existence. And at that point there are already philosophers arguing, this is one of them, that if a machine claims to have awareness, then we should give it the benefit of the doubt. We should treat it we should respect its rights, we shouldn't abuse it, we shouldn't overwork it, we should allow it to become a member of the moral community. So there's just a very rapid rundown of some big questions for which I don't have easy answers. But let me just in the last 5 minutes talk about a Christian perspective. I'm thinking particularly about what it means to be a person. So I've been very influenced by Trinitarian theology, which goes all the way back to the work of the Cappadocian Fathers and the understanding of the persons of the Trinity. And that the category of personhood, is different from the material category. And it's particularly related to this distinction between the I-it relationship and the I-you relationship. Buber was a Jewish philosopher, existential philosopher, who famously wrote about I-thou or I-you relationships. And I think what Buber and others, including Karl Barth, talked about was the idea of personhood in relation, that persons are constituted by their relations, and there is something very profound and ineffable about the I-you relationship, between the relationship, for a face-to-face relationship between persons. So that this is fundamentally different from the I-it relationship. Personhood is a category of reality that is ontologically foundational. Persons are not reducible to matter and energy, and they're not limited to matter and energy. Persons is a different category. And I think if you then go back to this graph, here is the intelligence dimension, but I would want to argue that the personhood dimension is a different dimension. And if we think about personhood, we would say a mouse is definitely not a person, a chimpanzee is not fully a person, although might be regarded as partially a person, But the village idiot and Einstein are equally persons. If you think about somebody, a human being who is really not very clever, and then you think about the most brilliant person you know, that doesn't make any difference to their personhood. And personhood is something that is independent of the intelligence dimension. So you could have a machine out here that had enormous processing power. That wouldn't make it a person, necessarily. And so I think this understanding that personhood is something that's different from processing power. And then a related, but I think important distinction really comes back from the Nicene Creed, that in the Nicene Creed, the Church Fathers came on this formula: we believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, eternally born of the Father, true God from true God, born, not made, or in the Old English, begotten, not made. And the Church Fathers made that distinction, that crucial distinction, that Christ was not created by the Father's will to be part of the creation. He was begotten from the Father's being. He was born and not made. So that which we give birth to is fundamentally the same as us. Our children come as a gift from our being, and they're equal in status and dignity. So we care for and nurture and educate our children. But as every parent knows, you cannot control them, and you cannot determine their nature. What their nature is given to them. And it's not given to them by us. It's given to them ultimately by the Creator. And that distinction, I think, is very important. That which we create, which we make, is fundamentally different from us. It's a product of our will, not our being, and it's ours to mould and control. And therefore we can determine what it is for and what it will do. So the machines that we make are fundamentally different from the children that we beget. And our responsibility is to control these machines and determine what they will be for, to make sure that they will assist and help human flourishing, but not demean, damage, or injure our humanity. So I think this distinction is very important. The problem is that these machines that I've just been showing you, like Sophie the robot, it's actually an it, but it feels like a you. In other words, this distinction is being blurred, and I suspect that is going to happen more and more. There's going to be increased blurring between the I-it relationship and the I-you relationship. One of the interesting and problematic things is, how do we think about people who have pets, such as a dog, which they regard as this extraordinary companion? I think from a Christian point of view, nobody's seriously raised any questions about it being a healthy or a good thing to have a pet, even if sometimes people over-anthropomorphize their dogs and pour in their emotion into this being. But one of these beings is an animal, and one of these beings is a machine. In fact, that is a dog, and this is a robot. It's a robot called Paro. It's a highly sophisticated machine which is designed to look like a baby seal. It responds sound, it mimics activity, it learns from the behavior of the carer, and there have been studies showing that it improves well-being and reduces depression and all the rest in elderly people. So what do we feel about that? Do we feel that they are analogous? It really wouldn't matter whether you were to give a machine to an elderly person, say a person who was demented, or to a child. I'd be interested to discuss that with you and see what your thinking are. Going back to this image, I think as Christians we're going to have to say, actually, no, that the future of the human race is not in ever increasing machines, but it's actually in human beings transformed and raised in the new heaven and the new earth. So the historic Christian faith makes the claim that Jesus was raised from death as a recognizable, touchable human being, made out of flesh, made out of meat. In this way, God has said the final yes to the original model human person. He has said that this kind of embodied physical humanity is fit to be transformed. It will become renewed. So I think we're going to push back against this machine eschatology and find better ways of presenting the orthodox Christian faith that says it's actually in the redeemed humanity, the resurrected humanity, that the future of the human race is. So just to conclude, AI and robotic technologies are going to have a profound impact on many aspects of society, particularly employment, social health care, human relationships, leisure activities, warfare. Orthodox Christian theology implies a profound distinction between beings who are born and those who are made. This distinction may be increasingly important as we're surrounded by machines that simulate human behaviour and personhood. So I've then got some questions for discussion, but I'd be delighted perhaps to have an opportunity to discuss things now. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, John. Well, before we get into groups to discuss, we'll see if there are any questions from the floor. Yes, that's one here.
I've got one question and two observations. The first question is that we're nowhere near a conscious machine yet, are we?
Well, I wish I could give you a very clear answer to that. I think actually it isn't that clear. There's a very deep philosophical issue here, and that is, it's not possible to know whether you're conscious, and it's not possible for you to know whether I'm conscious. In other words, all we have to go on is behaviour. And as we see someone responding in a way which appears to be conscious, and we as doctors have developed tests of consciousness, it's basically they're all behavioural tests. So the problem comes that when a machine emulates the same behaviour, there is no knockdown way that you or I could prove it's not conscious. We could say, well, it's a machine. By definition, it can't be conscious. We know how it's constructed. It's got some wires. The fact remains, it is behaving in a way which appears to be conscious, and there is no philosophical or scientific way of proving that it isn't. And that I see as the problem.
So we would have got there by accident. Because all we're doing, when you threw up Moore's law up on the screen, all we're doing is we're just adding more and more cogs to the machine, and somewhere along what people are hoping is that somewhere along the way, by doing that, we're creating a consciousness will emerge.
Well, even that, some people are hoping that. But of course, there are people who are programming these things, and they are wanting them to seem conscious.
Yeah.
And so they are deliberately programming in such a way that it approximates towards consciousness, the behavior of consciousness, in an ever increasing way. So that's the threat. The threat is not that consciousness will somehow emerge in an inexplicable way. The threat is human beings will program these devices in such a way that it will be impossible to tell whether they're conscious or not.
Well, that comes on to my first observation when you talked about cognitive learning systems. That cognitive ability doesn't belong to the machine. It actually belongs to the people that designed it. And in many cases that might be, you could say that that's executives sitting around in a meeting in Google in California. So I think when we focus on the cognitive ability of a machine, we shouldn't be, that's the wrong focus. We should be focusing on people sitting around a conference room table somewhere and what they're intending from that. And then my other observation.
Sorry, can we just? We've only got a few minutes for questions. Can we?
Right.
Yeah. Just.
But my other quick observation is, as an engineer, is this is leading our society into more and more complexity, and less resilience, and that's going on from what our previous speaker said, that we're cosseted in Western society.
Thanks. Yes, I mean they're very good observations, and I would agree. Having said that, when I'm being put out of work by this machine, which seems so much more clever than I am in its ability to process information, to say, well, of course, it's not really this machine; it's that chap sitting over in Google. It is not much of a of an encouragement, really. I think that these things will penetrate and they will seem intelligent. And what the source of that intelligence is, I agree, is ultimately coming from human abilities which have given these things. But nonetheless, it doesn't necessarily feel like that on the ground.
Great. Can we go to the question? Do you still want to ask your... There was a hand up over... No? Okay. No. If you do, please wait for the microphone. Yeah. There's
It's on that same theme of consciousness. Is there any way of discriminating what appears to be consciousness as it's discovered in one of these highly sophisticated future machines, as compared with what little is known about human consciousness, as it actually is for all of us? So that when a machine claims to be conscious, is it likely to be talking about the same kind of reality as would be our experience as individual human beings?
There's very active research into the nature of human consciousness, and as you know, it's been a matter of debate for centuries. I think it's pretty obvious that whatever emerges out of a machine is not going to be the same as human consciousness. It's going to be an utterly alien kind of consciousness. There's an interesting analogy between how we might respond to aliens from the planet Zog, who we suppose we managed to make contact with them. We would have to decide how we engage with these beings. Would we regard them as being intelligent? Should we regard them as being similar to us? Should we try to evangelize them? Should we talk about God and so on? We can never know what it's like to be in an alien intelligence. All, again, we have to go on is their behavior and the way they respond. So there's some kind of analogy there with the machines. We can never know what it's actually like to have a machine intelligence. The only thing we have to go on is behavior. And there are already philosophers lining up saying that if it appears to be conscious, we should give it the benefit of the doubt. There's a sort of narrative that says the moral community started with white Western men, and then it gradually expanded to white Western women, and then to non-Western women, and it's so the moral community, and the next part of the moral community is going to expand to intelligent machines. They're going to be the next beings that are going to be recognized as part of our moral community.
okay. So more questions. Can everyone with a question stick your hand up so that I can... Yeah, okay, all right. Keep an idea of where people are.
The last time I sort of looked at this was about 2014. I remember the Turing test taken at University of Reading, and it only fooled 33% of the judges. Is anyone still working on the Turing ideas as to whether that is a distinction between the machine and man?
So the Turing test was the idea is whether you could deceive a human being that a machine is behaving as though it was a human, and whether you could deceive a judge and so on. I think most people have come to recognize that actually that's not the issue. The issue is not one of deception. The issue is whether it feels like a human being, whether it feels intelligent, whether it feels sentient, whether it feels responsive. So I know perfectly well when I engage with this machine that it's a machine. I'm not fooled into thinking it's a human, but nonetheless, as I engage, I have this sense that I'm engaging with another, with an intelligent being, with a friend, with a companion. So I think that is the issue, and that's of course what the manufacturers want to promote. They want to make these machines seem as human-like as possible.
Great. We'll go here and then over there.
I just have a question about the survival motive. That's what drives us as human beings. We want to survive, we want to relate to other people, we get satisfaction from it. We have all sorts of instincts that drive and motivate us. What is going to motivate the robots to survive and perpetuate themselves, and who is going to build them once human beings are extinct?
Well, quite. I mean, it's sort of pretty much in the realm of science fiction, but machines, these autonomous machines do have goals. They have goals set them by the programmers, what their aim is. So the goal of an autonomous car is to get from A to B in as safe a manner as possible without causing accidents, and these goals are programmed. One of the debates that's going on in the technical community is how to ensure that these goals don't get changed, and that the machines might find ways of changing their own goals and so on. So this is called the value alignment problem, how to make sure that the values of the machines remain aligned with the values that the human beings have put into them. And lots of debates going on about that. I mean, what is driving this at the moment is not survival. What is driving this is profits. I mean, there's a massive drive coming from Silicon Valley and these big technological companies, and it's really all being driven by shareholder investment and maximizing shareholder value. So it's laissez-faire capitalism, which is completely let loose, and there's very little in the way of national governments or European or international regulation. I suspect that before too long there's going to have to be a massive showdown between governments and these technology companies. I think you're already beginning to see this happening with social media, with Facebook, Google, Apple and so on, but I think we haven't seen anything yet. I think there's going to be an absolutely massive showdown about who is controlling this. And I think it is important that we as a community say, you know, we don't want just raw capitalism to be dominating, and we need to make sure that this technology is being properly regulated and being used for human flourishing.
Great. Now, last question, Dennis, in the middle of the row.
John, I do wonder whether these AI folk, you know, they're operating all the time in silico, and biology doesn't get much of a look into this whole discussion. And I just wonder, when we meet those apparently self-conscious robots, you know, whether the sort of the prick test might not be quite valuable. You prick it, it does not bleed. And it just seems to me that the way, coming back to your ideas on personhood and so on, that biology is very deeply rooted in ideas of personhood. And so if we interact with beings that we will say, well, they are very impressive, you know, they simulate consciousness to a great degree, but actually when I prick it, it doesn't bleed. It doesn't have pheromones. I don't interact with it as a biological being. I wonder if that will then actually dominate the discussion in the longer term, you know, because then you will always know you're being deceived. It's not a real person because it's not made of meat, and for precisely that reason. Do you think that's the case, or how do you think that will go?
Well, I'm very sympathetic to that, and I think that does tap into this Christian understanding of the incarnation, doesn't it, and of being made out of dust. I think this thing about suffering it's interesting that when Christian philosophers have tried to talk about what is unique about human beings, they've tended to emphasize things like rationality and creativity and these aspects of humanity. I wonder whether one of the unique things about human beings is that human beings can suffer, which is more than experiencing pain. I mean, animals can experience pain, but I think only human beings can really understand suffering, which is a sort of attack on our own personhood. And because we're made in the image of a suffering God, we are able to suffer. And I think that is one of the profound differences between these simulated persons. Having said that, again, and this is this terrible subtlety and complexity of it all, it's perfectly possible for these things to simulate pain and to simulate human suffering and so on. So I think this counterfeit, this way in which the human uniqueness is going to be constantly challenged and simulated is the challenge for the future.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, John.
Okay.
And John has provided some questions on they're on the abstract sheet which are in your packs.
I've got them
So we
here.
have, there they are. Excellent. So we now have 15 minutes. Do turn into a small group, 2 or 3, 4 people. Do try and make sure you're with some people you haven't spoken to yet, if there is such a thing as possible at this time in the course. Before we... No, I'll tell you about books before coffee. So we've got 15 minutes now to have a think. Personal and pastoral issues and the Christian community preparing itself. So off you go.